They pull a woman from a snow-covered barn in the dead of a Massachusetts winter. Her skin is the color of olive wood, her dress is thin as a shroud, and when she opens her eyes, she speaks in a language that makes a doctor a man of God, and science drop his medical bag. In his private journal, he would later write a single trembling sentence. It was as if she remembered a world before language itself. What they uncovered inside that hospital, the Blessed Mercy Infirmary, wasn't a medical case. It was a key. A key to a door humanity was never meant to open. How did this event, an event that drove 3 doctors from medicine forever, vanish so completely from history? The year is 1847. The town is Millbrook, Massachusetts, a name that feels intentionally forgettable. It sits just 15 miles from Salem, close enough to feel the phantom chill of the gallows, the lingering scent of burning conviction. This isn't just a place. It's a wound barely scabbed over. The town is split down the middle, a jagged line drawn between the old blood, the Congregationalist founders, who believe their faith is carved into the very granite of New England, and the new blood, the Irish Catholics, driven by famine into the clattering, soulless textile mills. They are seen as foreign, suspect, their faith a strange and fevered thing. At the epicenter of this simmering distrust stands the blessed Mercy Infirmary, a 3-story brick monolith that promises salvation for the body but demands purification of the soul. It was founded by Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, a man whose piety was as hard and unyielding as the winter ground. He believed sickness was a stain on the spirit, a moral failure that could only be cleansed through rigorous Christian observance and the cold, sharp edge of modern medicine. It was a place of prayer bells and carbolic acid, a place where the soul was dissected as clinically as the flesh. The man who would preside over this unfolding nightmare was Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, the hospital's chief physician. At 34, he was the very picture of enlightened progress. Harvard-trained, a protégé of the famed Dr. Samuel Woodward, a pioneer in the humane treatment of the insane. Aldrich believed in order, in ledgers, in the power of observation. His faith was twofold, in the infallible logic of medical science and the unshakable providence of his Protestant God. He saw no contradiction between the two. He saw himself as a warrior on 2 fronts, battling the chaos of disease with one hand and the chaos of sin with the other. His personal study was a library of human suffering, hundreds of leather-bound journals filled with meticulous notes. He documented every symptom, every treatment, every prayer, believing that within these patterns he could decode the very language of God's judgment and mercy. He was a man standing on what he believed was the solid ground of reason, utterly unaware that he was about to step into an abyss, a place where his science would prove useless and his faith a fragile shield against a truth older than any god. He knew, visual cue, a faded sepia-toned photograph of the Blessed Mercy Infirmary. Describe it in detail. Look at this image. This isn't just a building. It's a tomb pretending to be a hospital. See the rigid symmetry of the windows, like vacant eyes staring out at a world they judge, but do not see. Notice the stark unadorned cross atop the cupola, not a symbol of comfort, but of authority, of spiritual dominion. The brickwork is stained with coal smoke, a permanent gray pall that even the winter snow can't seem to purify. Look at the figures near the entrance, blurred by the long exposure time. They aren't individuals. They are silhouettes, shadows consumed by the institution's greater shadow. The very air around the building seems heavy, oppressive. This is a place built on the belief that suffering could be managed, categorized, and controlled. It was built on a lie. And deep in the frozen earth beneath its foundations, an older truth was waiting patiently for its moment to awaken, waiting for the one person who could give it a voice. Into this cold, controlled world she arrives. The carriage wheels groan through the snow. a sound like a man in pain. They carry her in, a woman who calls herself only Latoya. The name itself is an anomaly here, a splash of warm foreign color in a world of stark black and white. Dark hair, olive skin in the racial calculus of 1847 Massachusetts. She is an unsettling equation. Found unconscious in a farmer's barn, dressed for a summer day in the heart of a blizzard. Her only possessions: a leather pouch with 7 silver coins, always 7, and a brass locket, smooth and featureless, holding a secret she herself doesn't seem to know. Dr. Aldrich begins his examination, expecting to find the ravages of exposure, frostbite, malnutrition, the delirium of a freezing mind. He finds none. Her body is inexplicably healthy. Her vital signs are perfect. Her reflexes sharp. But it's her eyes that stop him. They are ancient. They hold a stillness that is not calm, but an unnerving, absolute awareness. It's the stillness of a predator or a prophet. When he asks her name, she gives it Latoya, nothing more. The words are simple, but the message is clear. She is not defined by a family, a lineage, or a past. She simply is. The first crack in Dr. Aldrich's world appears during the intake process. It's a standard question, a formality. What is your religious background? The change in her is instantaneous and terrifying. Her body, so placid moments before, is seized by a tremor. Her breath catches in her throat, and then she begins to speak. The words that spill from her lips are not English. Aldrich, a man of education, assumes it's Latin, perhaps a frantic, garbled prayer. He calls for his junior colleague, Dr. Marcus Brennan, a young man with a passion for classical languages. Brennan listens, his brow furrowed in concentration, and then he shakes his head, a look of profound confusion on his face. He later writes in his report, his hand unsteady, the grammar is alien. It is a fusion of tongues, some syllables sounding vaguely Latin, others with the cadence of something African, or perhaps Caribbean. Yet she speaks it not as a recitation, but as a native tongue. When I questioned her in English about this language, she stared at me blankly, claiming to have no memory of speaking it at all. This wasn't a symptom of hysteria. This was something else. This was a voice clawing its way out from a place deeper than memory. The first night, the fabric of reality within the hospital begins to tear at the seams. Sister Mary Catherine, a Catholic nun whose presence was a constant source of quiet controversy, is on duty. She is a woman accustomed to the strange rhythms of the sick and dying, but what she witnesses with Latoya is of a different order. The girl seems to exist a few seconds ahead of the present. She sits up in bed moments before the night watchman's boots echo in the distant hall. She asks for water just as the orderly is heading to the well. She awakens from a deep sleep. At the exact instant, the far-off church bells begin their pre-dawn chime, not reacting to the sound, but anticipating it. It's as if she isn't living in time, but observing its flow from an outside vantage point. The other patients feel it too. Mrs. Elena Hitchcock, a woman in the final stages of pneumonia, delirious with fever, awakens screaming, she claims. Latoya, who hasn't left her bed, stood over her and described, in perfect, heartbreaking detail, the moment her husband died 5 years prior, the specific words he whispered, the way the light fell across his face, intimate details known only to her. When questioned, Latoya denies it all. She claims she never spoke. And Dr. Aldrich, clinging to his science, dismisses it as fever dreams, the ravings of the sick. He is trying to fit an ocean into a teacup. Historical quote from the Lost Journal of Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, dated January 18, 1847. The patient exhibits behaviors that challenge our understanding of mental disorders. While she shows no signs of traditional hysteria or melancholia, her presence seems to affect other patients in ways that medical science cannot adequately explain. I observed her tonight, sitting upright, eyes closed, speaking in that strange, fluid language. As her voice, eerily clear, filled the ward, every other soul began to stir restlessly in their beds. A young man, Thomas Brewster, recovering from a grievous leg fracture, later reported seeing vivid images in his mind, not memories, but visions of a sun-scorched land, of strange rituals around a fire, of a history he had never lived. She fell silent. He was weeping, though he could not say why. I find myself torn between my scientific training and observations that suggest phenomena beyond our current comprehension. It is as if her mind is a broadcast, and the other patients are unwilling receivers of a message they cannot decipher. The very atmosphere of the Blessed Mercy Infirmary begins to warp around her presence. It's not magic. It's something more subtle, more invasive. The nurses, hardened women used to the grim calculus of life and death, report that their duties flow with an unnatural ease when Latoya is calm. Bandages wrap more smoothly, fevers break more quickly, medicines seem more potent. When she is agitated, however, the opposite is true. Instruments are misplaced, patients become fractious. The entire ward feels charged with a low-grade, anxious static. Even the building itself seems to respond. The coal furnaces, which had sputtered and struggled against the relentless winter, now burn with a steady, even heat. The rats that had been a constant scurrying plague in the walls simply vanish. These are not things a man of science can measure or record in his ledgers, yet every member of the staff feels it. They don't speak of it openly, but it passes between them in shared glances, in hushed whispers in the linen closets. They are all beginning to understand, on a primal level, that Latoya isn't just a patient in the hospital. She is a force. Acting on it, Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore, the hospital's stern patriarch, arrives for his bi-weekly spiritual rounds. He is a man who sees the devil in every shadow and temptation, in every idle thought. He is informed of the strange new patient, and seeing it as his duty, requests a private meeting with her in the hospital's small, cold chapel. They are alone for nearly an hour. The staff waiting outside hear no raised voices, no prayers, no struggle, only silence. When the Reverend emerges, his face is the color of ash. His hand, the one that holds his leather-bound Bible, is trembling so violently that the book rattles against his leg. He doesn't speak to anyone. He fumbles with his coat, his eyes wide with a terror that seems to have hollowed him out from the inside. Dr. Aldrich intercepts him at the door, asking what happened. The Reverend turns to him, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. That young woman. She possesses knowledge that no Christian soul should carry. We are not dealing with sickness, doctor. We are dealing with something that extends beyond medicine, into realms where only God's final judgment can provide an answer. He had walked into that chapel, expecting to confront a lost and sinful girl. He walked out having confronted an abyss. In the wake of the Reverend's terror, a schism forms among the staff. They divide into two unspoken factions. The first, led by Dr. Aldrich, sees Latoya as a profound medical puzzle, a unique case of psychological trauma that, if unlocked, could revolutionize their understanding of the human mind. They are the men of science, clinging to their textbooks and their rational explanations, determined to diagnose and categorize her. The second faction, comprised mostly of the older nurses and orderlies, the ones who have lived longer and seen more inexplicable things, are driven by a more primal fear. They whisper in the corridors. They make signs against the evil eye when they pass her room. They believe she is a vessel for something unholy, a dark presence drawn to a place of suffering. They see the unnatural calm she brings not as a blessing, but as the eerie silence that precedes a storm. They feel her influence as a contamination, a spiritual sickness that threatens to infect them all. The hospital is no longer just a place of healing. It has become a battleground for two opposing worldviews, reason versus superstition, science versus the terrifying possibility of the unknown. Dr. Brennan, the young classicist, becomes obsessed. The language Latoya speaks haunts him. It defies every rule of linguistics he has ever learned. He spends his nights poring over ancient texts in the hospital library, searching for any parallel, any clue. He finds nothing. Driven by a hunch he can't explain, he travels to the Salem Historical Society, digging through dusty maritime archives. And there, buried in the brittle pages of a ship's manifest from 1823, he finds it. A name of a slave ship, the Esperanza, which wrecked in a storm off the Massachusetts coast. The records detail the rescue of the survivors, and among them, a notation that chills Brennan to the bone. It describes a young girl found clinging to the wreckage who spoke in tongues, unknown to Christian ears, and seemed to possess a preternatural calm. The manifest lists her name, written in faded, spidery ink, Latoya, age approximately 4. The record states she was placed with a rigid Presbyterian family in a nearby town, but vanished 3 years later without a trace. Brennan's hands shake as he does the math. If this is the same person, she should be 28 years old. But the woman in their hospital bed appears no older than 22. Time itself seems to bend around her dot. Armed with this impossible discovery, Dr. Aldrich decides to confront her. He approaches her not as a doctor to a patient, but as a man seeking a truth he is terrified to hear. He sits by her bed and speaks. The name of the ship, Esperanza. The reaction is explosive. It's as if the word is a key turning a lock deep within her. The unknown language pours from her, no longer a whisper, but a torrent of grief and rage. Tears stream down her face, and her hand flies to the brass locket at her throat, clutching it like an anchor in a storm. For the first time she speaks of a past, not in a clear narrative, but in shattered fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror. She speaks of the suffocating darkness of a ship's hold, the smell of death and despair, the sound of chains not as a metaphor, but as the rhythm of her childhood. She describes being taken to a house of harsh prayers, where they tried to wash away what I was. And she speaks of escaping into the deep woods, where she found shelter with those who remembered the old ways. She is not describing a life. She is describing a lineage of trauma, a history she has somehow inherited and is now forced to relive. Whispered warning, a sound of a hushed, urgent whisper, as if from one nurse to another in a darkened hallway. Don't look her in the eyes for too long. It's like she sees the parts of you that you keep hidden, even from yourself. Agnes stared at her yesterday, just for a moment, and then she went to the chapel and wept for an hour. She said she suddenly remembered every cruel word she'd ever said in her life all at once. It's not a healing, it's a judgment. Stay away from her. Stay away. She looks at Dr. Aldrich, her eyes clear now, the storm having passed, leaving behind a terrifying calm. I don't age as others do, she whispers, the words hanging in the sterile air of the room. Time moves differently for those who carry the weight of generations. I remember being young, but I also remember being old. I remember dying on that ship, but I also remember being born in a land of sun and drums. The line between my life and the lives of my mothers dissolved long ago. Dr. Aldrich, the man of science, scrambles for an explanation. Dissociative identity? A complex fantasy constructed to cope with unspeakable trauma? But it doesn't fit. Her knowledge is too specific. Her effect on the hospital, too real. He is a cartographer whose maps are suddenly useless, standing at the edge of a continent that shouldn't exist. He documents her words in his journal, his scientific detachment a crumbling facade. He writes, "She speaks of her own life as if it were a story she has read, a collection of memories belonging to others. Is she a patient, or is she a library? A living archive of human suffering?" The question hangs in his mind, a seed of terrifying possibility. The tension in the hospital fractures along the lines of belief. Mrs. Hitchcock, the dying pneumonia patient, makes a shocking request. She begs to be moved to the bed beside Latoya. "She brings me dreams of my Samuel," she explains to a stunned Dr. Aldrich. "Not just memories. It feels real. I can smell the pipe tobacco on his coat. I can feel the warmth of his hand. She doesn't speak to me of him. She lets him speak to me." Reluctantly, Aldrich agrees. The effect is immediate. Mrs. Hitchcock's breathing eases. Her fever abates. A sense of profound peace settles over her. The news spreads through the ward like wildfire. Soon, other patients are clamoring for the same thing, drawn to Latoya's bedside like moths to a strange and mysterious flame. They report vivid dreams, sudden remissions, a feeling of being unburdened from sorrows they didn't even know they carried. They see her not as a patient, but as a source of miraculous, inexplicable healing. But where there is light, a shadow is cast. Jacob Morrison, a merchant recovering from dysentery, a man of rigid principles and a deep-seated Puritan guilt, has the opposite reaction. Her proximity is poison to him. He is plagued by nightmares of unimaginable horror. He sees himself on the deck of a slave ship, not as a victim, but as a crewman, whip in hand. He feels the splintered wood under his bare feet, smells the stench of the hold, and hears the cries of the dying in a language he understands in the dream, but cannot recall upon waking. He awakens screaming, drenched in sweat, consumed by a guilt for sins he never committed. She brings the sins of the past with her. He raves to Dr. Aldrich, his eyes wild with terror. "I see things. I feel things. It's the guilt of my ancestors, and she is making me wear it like a skin." To save Morrison's sanity, they are forced to move him to the farthest wing of the hospital. Latoya's presence is a mirror, reflecting not what is there, but what is hidden. For some, it reflects lost love. For others, it reflects buried sin. The three ministers return. Reverend Whitmore is no longer alone. He is flanked by Reverend Isaiah Blackwood of the First Baptist Church and Reverend Cornelius Marsh of the Methodist congregation. They are a united front of doctrinal authority, a holy tribunal. They demand a meeting with Dr. Aldrich. "We have reason to believe," Whitmore begins, his voice low and accusatory, "that your patient is practicing a form of spiritualism, a pagan communion. Family members of the sick report their loved ones are speaking of visions and dreams that are profoundly unchristian. She is not healing them, doctor. She is poisoning their souls with heathen fantasies." Dr. Aldrich finds himself trapped. He is a man of science, funded by the church. His loyalty is divided. He cannot deny the inexplicable recoveries, yet he cannot explain them in a way that won't be condemned as heresy. He is standing between two implacable forces: the mystery in his hospital bed and the dogma that built the walls around it. A dangerous compromise is reached. The ministers will be allowed to observe her, to seek evidence of their devil, while Aldrich continues his search for a diagnosis. Neither side understands they are not in control. They are merely observers of a process that began centuries ago. The joint observation begins, a tense collaboration between faith and science. And under this combined scrutiny, Latoya's abilities become even more undeniable, more terrifyingly precise. Reverend Blackwood, the Baptist, a man who believes in the raw, personal experience of the Holy Spirit, is the first to see the pattern. He notes what he calls spiritual synchronicities. Latoya will begin her low, Melodic chanting at the exact moment a patient across the hospital is seized by a paroxysm of grief or pain. Her words, though incomprehensible, act as a balm. She seems to absorb their suffering, to process it, and to radiate a profound calm in its place. He writes in his journal, his faith shaken to its core, "I have witnessed what I can only describe," as a form of spiritual empathy so profound it borders on the divine. She seems to carry the sorrows of others within herself. It is a gift I cannot reconcile with any biblical precedent. It is as if she is a saint for a religion that has never existed. This is the moment of descent. For those of you who understand, that knowledge is a form of initiation, that some truths are earned through courage. Comment below with the phrase, "The veil is lifting." You are no longer just a viewer. You are a witness. By typing those words, you acknowledge that you are ready to see what lies behind the curtain. You are ready to join the few who dare to look into the abyss. Do it now. Announce your presence. Dr. Aldrich, meanwhile, devises an experiment. With her consent, he arranges for Latoya to meet with patients one-on-one, while he observes from behind a screen, a man of science hiding in the shadows. He brings in Mr. Jeremiah Couch, a 70-year-old farmer whose lungs are ravaged by a cough that has resisted all treatment. Within minutes of meeting Latoya, the old man, a stoic and silent Yankee, begins to speak. He talks of the War of 1812, of the terror and the bloodshed, of the friends he watched die, memories he had buried for over 30 years. He speaks, and Latoya simply listens, her presence a silent, accepting vessel. As he unburdens his soul, his racking cough subsides. By the end of the hour, he is breathing freely, the poison of memory and sickness seemingly drawn from his body. "It was as if she reached into my soul and pulled out the shrapnel," he later tells Aldrich, his eyes wet with the tears of a man unburdened. The next case shatters any remaining hope of a rational explanation. They bring in Timothy Wadsworth, a 12-year-old boy plagued by fits of madness. During these episodes, he speaks in voices that are not his own, describing with chilling accuracy events from Mildred's colonial past, secrets long buried. His parents fear he is possessed. They bring him to Latoya. The moment the boy enters the room, his frantic energy ceases. He looks at her, and a flicker of recognition crosses his face. Then he begins to speak. He speaks in the same impossible, fluid language that she does. For nearly an hour, they converse. A 12-year-old boy and a woman out of time, speaking a language that exists on no map, sharing knowledge that transcends a single lifetime. The boy speaks of conflicts between settlers and the indigenous Pennacook tribe, of forgotten burial sites, of sins committed on the very land the hospital now occupies. He speaks of them not as stories, but as memories. When the conversation ends, he reverts to being a normal 12-year-old boy, with no memory of what he said. His fits of madness never return. Visual cue. A close-up on a page from Dr. Nehemiah. Blackwood's journal. The handwriting is sharp, clinical, and chilling. The ink is a faded brown. Specimen 7, of African origin, exhibits a dangerous resilience. Her claims of ancestral memory persist despite our most rigorous realignment protocols. She speaks of the suffering of her forebears as if she witnessed it herself. This is not mere delusion. It is a form of consciousness incompatible with Christian civilization. It is a contagion of memory that threatens the established order. I have concluded that her mind represents a spiritual lineage that must be severed. For the safety of the community, for the purity of our future, this connection to the past must be burned out. Containment is no longer sufficient. We must proceed to elimination. Dr. Brennan, back in the archives, makes another discovery. He finds the papers of a long-dead minister, Reverend Josiah Mather, dated 1826. The letters describe Mather's attempts to civilize, and Christianize. A mysterious young woman living in the woods outside Millbrook, the same woods where Latoya claimed she went after escaping her Presbyterian captors. Mather describes her as a child of many mothers, a girl who spoke in tongues that predate the Tower of Babel and held knowledge of healing arts that seemed to draw upon the earth itself. His final letter is a testament of failure and fear. "I can no longer continue this work," Mather wrote. "She has shown me truths about the nature of human suffering that my faith cannot contain. I fear that in my attempt to save her soul, I have glimpsed something mortal minds were never meant to comprehend. I am abandoning this task, not for her sake, but for my own. The timeline is perfect. It is her. She has been out there for years, a hidden queen in a forest kingdom, a keeper of secrets waiting to be found. The hospital itself is becoming sick. The psychic pressure is too great. The staff begins to break down. Nurse Margaret Thornton starts having dreams of the 17th century, vivid, detailed dreams of the town's founding, of faces and names she's never known. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the oldest physician on staff, finds himself remembering conversations with patients who died decades ago, their voices clear as day in his mind. The barrier between past and present, between the living and the dead, is dissolving for everyone. The hospital is no longer a sealed container. It is a permeable membrane, and Latoya is the catalyst causing the history of the land to bleed into the present. She has not brought a sickness into the hospital. She has awakened a sickness that was already there, dormant in the blood and the soil. The breaking point comes from where it began. Mrs. Hitchcock, the pneumonia patient. Now lucid and healthy, she calls for Dr. Aldrich. Her face is grim, her voice urgent. "Doctor," she whispers, "what she's shown me. It isn't just about my Samuel. It's about this place, this very building." She leans closer, her eyes wide. "She told me what this hospital is built on. She showed me the bones. There are secrets buried in the foundation, Doctor. Secrets people killed to protect. And she knows where they are." Mrs. Hitchcock is no longer just a patient. She is a messenger. The channel has been opened, and the first transmissions from the abyss are coming through. She is telling him that the true source of the hospital's haunting is not a ghost. It is its own history. Aldrich, accompanied by a pale and trembling Reverend Whitmore, listens as Mrs. Hitchcock relays Latoya's vision. The Blessed Mercy Infirmary, she explains, was built atop a sacred burial ground of the Pennacook people. But that's not all. After the tribe was driven out, the land became a dumping ground, place where local slave owners would secretly bury the bodies of enslaved people who died from abuse or overwork, denying them even the dignity of a Christian grave. "Their spirits are not at rest," Mrs. Hitchcock says, her voice taking on the cadence of Latoya's own. "They are crying out from the earth, demanding to be named, demanding that their stories be told." Reverend Whitmore turns away, unable to meet her gaze. He knows it's true. The construction records from 1834 mentioned irregular remains found during the excavation. He himself had given the order to have them quietly removed, to pave over the past in the name of progress and piety. Then comes the final, devastating blow. "She told me about a doctor," Mrs. Hitchcock continues, "one of the first to work here, a man named Nehemiah Blackwood." At the name, Reverend Isaiah Blackwood, who has been standing in the doorway, flinches as if struck. "He conducted experiments," she says, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper, "on the most vulnerable. Runaway slaves, captured natives, immigrants with no one to speak for them. He was trying to prove their minds were inferior, their souls less than human. He kept journals, detailed records of every horrific thing he did." Latoya says the journals are still here, hidden in this hospital. The secret is out. The hospital wasn't just built on dead bodies. It was built on a foundation of systematic torture, of racist science, of a hidden evil that wore the mask of medicine. And the man responsible was the father of the very minister who now sought to condemn Latoya. A frantic search begins. Dr. Aldrich, guided by a sudden intuitive certainty he can't explain, descends into the hospital's damp, moldering archives. Behind a row of mundane administrative ledgers, he finds them, a set of leather-bound journals, the name N. Blackwood embossed in faded gold on the spines. He opens the first volume, and the pure, unadulterated evil of the text leaps off the new page. Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood had not been a healer. He had been a monster. The pages are filled with clinical, dispassionate descriptions of experiments designed to measure the pain tolerance of different races, to induce psychological terror, to systematically erase the cultural identity of his victims. He referred to his patients not by name, but as specimens. He detailed his attempts to break their spirits, to sever their connection to what he called their heathen memories. It is a litany of horrors, a scientific record of one man's descent into absolute depravity. The most chilling entries concern a young woman from the woods, brought to him in 1838. It is unmistakably Latoya. Dr. Blackwood describes his frustration with her. Every method he used to break her sensory deprivation, physical restraint, psychological torment, only seemed to make her stronger, deepening her connection to the ancestral memories he was trying to destroy. Her consciousness appears to be collective. He wrote in a moment of what seems like terrified insight. Punishing her body only seems to unleash the voices of 1,000 others who speak through her. It is as if I am not fighting one woman, but a whole invisible tribe. He had set out to prove her inferiority, but instead, he had stumbled upon a form of human existence his worldview could not possibly contain, and it had terrified him. But the journals reveal more than just his cruelty. They reveal his failure and his undoing. His final entries are a terrifying spiral into madness. He writes of the hospital itself turning against him, staff members reporting the same nightmares, the building groaning with voices only he could hear. The boundaries are blurring, he wrote in his penultimate entry, his handwriting becoming jagged and erratic. I dream I am a slave in the hold of a ship. I feel the lash on my own back. I hear my children being sold. In my attempt to silence her history, I have become infected by it. Her memories are now my memories. He had tried to dissect the soul and had gotten its blood on his hands. He thought he was the scientist observing the specimen. He was wrong. The specimen was observing him, judging him, and ultimately breaking him. The final piece of the puzzle is delivered by Reverend Isaiah Blackwood himself. Racked with a guilt that is now 2 generations deep, he confesses the secret his family has kept for a decade. My father didn't die of a heart attack, he tells Dr. Aldrich, his voice choked with shame. He took his own life. In his study, he left a note. He said the woman from the woods had shown him the sins of our ancestors. Not just his own, but the sins of his father and his father's father, who had grown rich from the slave trade. He said she made him feel the weight of it all, the centuries of suffering our family had caused. He wrote that he could no longer live with the knowledge of what he was. She didn't kill him, Doctor. The truth did. The cycle is complete. Latoya's power is not just to remember her own past. It is to force others to remember theirs. She is a living embodiment of karmic justice, a force that holds up a mirror to the soul of a man, a family, and a nation, and forces them to see the blood on their hands. Dr. Aldrich knows what he must do. It is an act that will likely end his career, destroy the hospital's reputation, and unleash a storm of controversy. But it is the only path forward. He gathers the senior staff, the 3 ministers, and the most stable patients in the hospital. Chapel. The air is thick with anticipation and dread. He stands before them, no longer just a man of science, but a man transformed by a truth he can no longer deny. "We have been trying to diagnose this woman," he announces, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "We have been trying to cure her, to contain her. We have been wrong. We have been asking the wrong questions. The time has come to stop treating her as a patient and to start listening to her as a witness." The doors of the chapel open, and Latoya enters. She is no longer the frightened, silent girl who arrived 6 weeks ago. She walks with the grace and gravity of a queen, her eyes holding the weight of centuries. The trial is over. The testimony is about to begin. "I am not one person," she begins, her voice calm and clear, filling the sacred space with a power that silences every whisper, every nervous cough. "I am a vessel. I am the keeper of memories you have chosen to forget. I carry the voices of those who died in your fields and in the holds of your ships. I hold the stories that were erased from your history books. The pain of those who suffered in silence lives in my blood. What you have called my sickness, I call my purpose." She moves to the center of the room, and as she does, the very air seems to shimmer. People gasp. A cold spot moves through the pews. They feel it, the unseen presence of others, a silent congregation of spirits, drawn by her voice, filling the chapel, waiting to be heard. "This building," she continues, her voice taking on a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence, "stands on desecrated ground. Before your God was worshipped here, my mother's mothers came to this place to speak to the earth, to honor the dead, and to heal the living. The bones of the Pennacook are mixed with the bones of my African ancestors in the soil beneath your feet. They were buried here in shame and secrecy, and their spirits have been trapped by the weight of your forgetting." As she speaks, Dr. Aldrich watches the faces in the room. He sees a dawning horror, but also a dawning understanding. He sees the pieces clicking into place, the strange sicknesses, the oppressive atmosphere, the shared nightmares. It wasn't a haunting. It was a calling, a desperate plea for remembrance from the earth itself. She turns her gaze upon Reverend Blackwood. It is not an accusatory look, but one of profound, sorrowful empathy. "Your father," she says, her voice softening, "sought to sever my connection to the past. He used his science as a weapon to silence the voices within me. But he did not understand. Pain does not sever memory. It deepens it. Every cruelty he inflicted upon my body only gave another ancestor a reason to speak, adding another voice to the choir of the dispossessed that I carry. The truth lands with the force of a physical blow." The staff members who had worked alongside Dr. Nehemiah Blackwood, who had perhaps assisted in his experiments, begin to weep openly. The hidden sin of the hospital is now laid bare in the house of God, and there is nowhere left to hide. Reverend Blackwood stumbles forward, his face a mask of agony. "What can we do?" he cries out, the question a plea for absolution. "How can we possibly atone for such a sin?" Latoya's expression shifts. A faint, sad smile touches her lips. "Acknowledgement," she says, "is the first prayer. But redemption requires more than words. It requires action. The spirits who are gathered in this room do not seek vengeance. They seek justice. And justice begins with remembrance." And then something impossible begins to happen. The patients in the chapel, the ones who had been drawn to her, start to speak. But the voices are not their own. Mrs. Hitchcock, her eyes closed, begins to recite a list of names. Dozens of them. African names, Native American names. The names of the dead who were buried without markers. Young Timothy Wadsworth stands, and in the clear, piping voice of a child, describes the exact location of the Pennacook ceremonial artifacts that were unearthed and discarded during the hospital's construction. Another patient, a quiet Irish woman, begins to sing a lament, a song of sorrow from a slave mother whose child was sold away, the melody ancient and heartbreaking. They are not possessed. They are conduits. The dead, silenced for generations, have finally found their voice. Through the living, the chapel has become a courtroom, and the patients have become the jury, channeling the testimony of ghosts. The healing you practice here, Latoya says, her voice rising above the chorus of borrowed voices, her words directed at Dr. Aldrich and the other physicians, is incomplete. It is a house built on a poisoned well. You cannot heal the body of a man while ignoring the wounds of his ancestors. Every person who comes to you for care carries not only their own pain, but the inherited trauma of generations. Until you acknowledge this, your medicine will only ever treat the skin of the wound, never the bone-deep infection. Dr. Aldrich feels the foundations of his entire profession crumble beneath him. He has spent his life studying the individual, the single, isolated case. Latoya has revealed a truth that is terrifying in its scope. No one is an island. Everyone is a continent, carrying the mountains and rivers, the battles and the graveyards, of all who came before them. As if in a trance, Latoya walks to the altar. She reaches into a small pouch at her waist and withdraws the smooth brass locket. She opens it. Inside, there is no portrait. There is only soil, dark, rich earth. "This is the soil of my mothers," she says, her voice now a whisper that carries to every corner of the room. "It is from a land I have never seen, but always remember. It contains the essence of their suffering and the strength of their survival." She places the locket on the altar, a humble offering on the symbol of a faith that had tried to destroy her. "As long as this remains here," she says, "in a place of honor, this hospital will be reminded of its true purpose, not merely to mend broken bodies, but to heal the wounds that span generations." With that act, the ritual is complete. The energy in the room shifts. A collective sigh, as if from 100 lungs, seems to pass through the chapel. The air clears. The weight is lifted. In the days that follow, a miracle occurs. But it is a quiet, practical miracle. Mrs. Hitchcock's pneumonia vanishes completely. Timothy Wadsworth retains a strange empathy, a gift for comforting the grieving. The entire hospital transforms. Patients recover faster. The staff works with a newfound sense of purpose. Dr. Aldrich begins to develop new therapies, ones that take into account a patient's family history, their cultural background, their inherited grief. He creates what he calls narrative medicine, encouraging patients to tell the story of their pain, believing that in the telling, healing can begin. He works with Reverend Whitmore to build a memorial garden on the hospital grounds, planting a tree for every unnamed soul buried beneath them, with the names recited in the chapel carved into a central stone. The hospital becomes a true place of healing. But the world outside is not ready for the truth. The backlash is swift and brutal. Rumors of the chapel ceremony leak out. The town's mayor, leaders from the Massachusetts Medical Society, they descend upon the hospital, their faces grim with accusation. Spiritualist nonsense, they call it, heathen practices. They threaten to pull funding, to revoke medical licenses. They demand a rational, scientific explanation for the hospital's sudden success. Dr. Aldrich is trapped. He can give them the truth and be destroyed as a heretic and a madman, or he can give them a lie and preserve the sanctuary of healing he has built. The choice is impossible. He must protect the work, even if it means burying the truth that inspired it. Latoya understands. On the 37th day, she is gone. She leaves as she arrived, a mystery. She leaves behind a letter, formally releasing the hospital from all responsibility, requesting her records be sealed. She provides a path for the cover-up. She sacrifices her own story to protect the healing she initiated. In his official report, Dr. Aldrich writes that Latoya, a patient with a complex dissociative disorder, responded well to a novel form of group therapy. Her influence on other patients was an example of positive psychological contagion. The story is accepted. The institution is saved. The truth, once again, is buried. 3 of the 7 doctors on staff, Brennan among them, can't live with the lie. They quietly resign their posts and leave Massachusetts, never to practice medicine again. They saw something they could neither explain nor forget. For 30 years, Dr. Aldrich continues his work, a pioneer of a holistic medicine whose true origins he can never reveal. He lives a life of quiet, secret knowledge. Then the letters begin to arrive. A colleague in Ohio describes a young woman of mixed ancestry, found in a storm, who seems to carry the memories of others. Another report from Virginia. One from Pennsylvania. Always the same story. A woman who doesn't seem to age, who speaks a language of no known origin, who enters a community and forces it to confront its buried history, acting as a catalyst for a painful, necessary healing, and then vanishes. Aldrich realizes Latoya was not an individual. She was an archetype, a member of a hidden lineage, a secret society of souls tasked with the terrible and sacred duty of being the world's memory, ensuring that no suffering is ever truly forgotten. They tore the hospital down in 1923. The records say the brass locket was never found. Some say a secret keeper, one of Dr. Aldrich's true disciples, took it for safekeeping. Others say it simply dissolved, its purpose served, its sacred earth returning to the larger soil of the land. The story of Latoya's case of the 37 days that bent reality in a small Massachusetts town was sealed away in a doctor's private journal, hidden in an attic, a truth too dangerous for its time. It wasn't a medical case. It was a glimpse behind the veil, a revelation that our world is built on a foundation of forgotten bones and silenced stories, and that from time to time a soul is born with the terrible gift of hearing them speak. Now you know.